Welcome to Tochi Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The night was still, the kind of silence that wrapped the house like a blanket. The only sound in the master bedroom was the soft whirring of the air conditioner and the occasional shifting of the bed sheets. Metchi lay beside Gday, her eyes open but unfocused, battling fatigue from a long day at the office. She had stayed up finalizing a last-minute pitch for one of Gday's struggling business arms, making calls late into the evening, rearranging her strategy board. It wasn't her job. She was just being a supportive wife. As she finally began to drift into sleep, her body succumbing to exhaustion, she heard him murmur in his sleep, at first a whisper, then a name, clear and unmistakable. Amara, I love you. The sentence punched through her chest like a blade. She turned slowly toward him, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. He was still asleep, a slight smile tugging at his lips, as if dreaming a soft memory. Her breath caught. Her heart thundered in her ears. And for the first time in their marriage, she looked at him and felt utterly alone. The name Amara wasn't just anyone. She was Metchi's best friend, her childhood sister, the one person she would have taken a bullet for without thinking. They had grown up in the same compound, attended the same primary school, shared clothes, secrets, and heartbreaks. Metchi could still remember when Amara was the only one who stood up for her during university when Metchi got expelled for a crime she didn't commit. They had vowed to be each other's maid of honor, to grow old gossiping on verandas, to name their daughters after each other. For Gday to whisper that name, a name laced with so much history and loyalty, felt like betrayal on a level that words couldn't reach. She didn't wake him. She didn't even move. Instead, she lay back down, eyes wide open, staring into the dark void of the ceiling. Her mind began to unravel, piecing together every odd glance, every late call, every awkward hug Amara had recently given her. 1,000 questions came alive in her head, but none louder than the one now pulsing in her chest. Why her? By morning, Gday was up and humming in the bathroom, shaving and whistling, completely unaware of the bomb he had dropped. Metchi watched him from the kitchen, her movements robotic as she stirred the oats. When he leaned in to kiss her cheek, she didn't flinch, but she didn't smile either. He was distracted, probably rushing for his Monday strategy meeting. She just nodded as he left, her mind heavy, her breakfast untouched. And as the door closed behind him, she let out a long, shaky breath. This wasn't something she could ignore. It wasn't just about infidelity. It was who it involved. Her best friend, her sister, her loyalty. And so began a journey of quiet observation, of hidden grief, and a fire that would soon consume everything she thought she'd built with love. Over the next few days, Metchi became a different kind of wife. Not loud, not confrontational, not dramatic. She was quiet, unusually so. But it was a silence that saw everything. She began to watch them both, taking mental notes as one would during a chess game. She noticed how Amara no longer spent the night at their house during girls' weekends, how she always had an excuse to leave early. She remembered how Gday, who used to leave his phone lying around, now carried it into the bathroom and kept it on silent. The business calls grew longer and more frequent, and on one occasion, when she picked up his ringing phone while he was in the shower, he screamed from behind the curtain like a man caught in a trap. It wasn't what he said. It was the panic in his voice that made her pause. That panic had a story. It had a reason. Flashbacks began to fill Metchi's mind, dragging her back to when things were still good. She remembered the first day she met Gday. Amara had introduced them at a small alumni reunion. Amara had raved about how Gday was hardworking, disciplined, and full of vision. Metchi had just gotten a job at a firm then, fresh out of NYSC, and wasn't thinking of dating. But Amara had insisted. He's different. Not like the others. Just talk to him. And talk they did. Hours turned into weeks, and weeks into a whirlwind romance. She remembered telling Amara after the first kiss, and how her friends smiled knowingly. She remembered their wedding, how Amara cried more than Metchi did during the vows. Was it love or possession in those tears? That memory haunted her now, Could it be that Amara had always wanted what she had? Or had she just given too much of herself to people who would never protect her the way she protected them? Metchi decided not to accuse anyone yet, not without proof. Instead, she played the doting wife, even as her mind planned like a lawyer preparing for trial. She began saving screenshots, watching Gday's mood swings, and paying attention to Amara's patterns. She called Amara randomly now, just to test her tone. There was always a delay in her voice, like someone trying to remember which lie she last told. Trust had died the moment Gday whispered that name in his sleep, but what was growing now was something stronger, colder, and far more dangerous than heartbreak. It was a woman awakening to the truth, slowly but surely pulling herself out of a pit she had been buried in by those closest to her. It had been years since Metchi gave up Chuka. She remembered it like it happened yesterday, the day Chuka pulled her aside after a youth conference and confessed his feelings. He was calm, deep, and sincere. He admired her strength, her clarity, her quiet leadership. She was taken aback, not because she didn't feel the same, but because at that time, Amara had just begun to talk to Chuka. Amara had even asked Metchi for advice on what to wear on their date. So when Chuka said, "I like you. I know you're close to Amara, but I can't pretend anymore," Metchi did what she always did. She sacrificed. She told him gently that her best friend liked him too much, and that she couldn't stand in the way. Chuka, respectful as always, stepped back. Amara never knew. And Metchi buried her feelings like she'd buried many of her dreams. That moment was the first time Metchi learned what it meant to bleed silently for friendship. Amara had always been the louder one, the prettier one in parties, the one people noticed first. But Metchi was the anchor, the voice of reason, the quiet protector. It had always been that way. Metchi had spent her life defending Amara, cleaning her messes, being her backup when she flopped in relationships or lost jobs. Once, Amara was nearly evicted, and Metchi quietly paid the landlord, asking him never to tell. She'd loved her like family. So now, knowing Amara had crossed the one line she never imagined, sleeping with her husband, felt like being stabbed by a hand she once held through storms. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the unraveling of everything she believed about loyalty. And yet, Metchi wasn't angry. Not yet. She was wounded, yes, but not broken. Something deeper stirred in her now, an understanding of her own worth, and how much of herself she had given without return. As she sat on the balcony that night, looking at the sky, her phone in hand and Gday's latest text, saying he'd be home late because of traffic, she made a silent vow. Not for war, not for drama, but for closure. They had made her a ghost in her own life, and she was about to come back to life, fierce, focused, and unforgiving. Metchi had never felt so heavy in her own home before. Every wall whispered reminders of a lie. Every picture frame mocked her loyalty. On the day she chose to confront Gday, the morning started like any other. He wore a blue-striped shirt she had bought during their second anniversary, and complimented her rice without looking up from his phone. She smiled faintly and nodded. But as he reached for his car keys, she asked him to sit down. Her voice didn't quiver. "We need to talk," she said. He looked surprised, even amused, and chuckled softly. "About what, baby?" That's when she brought out his tablet, the one he had carelessly left charging by the window the night before, and slid it across the table. The screen was open to a message from Amara. "Last night was dangerous, but worth it. I miss you already." His face drained of all color. He tried to blink it away, to search for an explanation, but the room had frozen into truth. Gday's first instinct was denial, the coward's refuge. "It's old. It meant nothing. She was going through something. I was just being there for her," he muttered, as if words could rearrange the weight of betrayal. But when Metchi raised a brow and opened another tab, voice notes, deleted texts recovered, and even one hotel booking under a fake name, he stopped talking. His shoulders slumped. For the first time in their marriage, she saw him without pride. "It was a mistake," he whispered. "I was weak. I thought you didn't care anymore. You were always working, always so perfect, and She cut him off. "So you chose Amara? My best friend?" The one person I trusted blindly. The room fell into silence again. He reached for her hand. She didn't flinch. She pulled away slowly, as if touching him now was betrayal to herself. Then came the most shocking part. He offered to bring Amara to apologize in person. And she did. Amara walked in 2 days later, dressed in the same innocence she wore when they used to share wrappers in the compound as children. She didn't cry until 5 minutes in, though Metchi knew the tears were not of guilt, but of fear. Fear of losing face. I swear it started as a mistake, Amara sniffled. I didn't plan it. It was just... Gday was always there, and I was lonely. She clasped Metchi's hands like old times, as though memory could cover betrayal. But Metchi was calm. She said little, nodded slowly, and thanked them both for the truth. They thought the storm had passed. They mistook her silence for forgiveness. What they didn't realize was that they hadn't seen the storm yet. She didn't need to scream. Her revenge would not come with a slap or a scene. It would come with a smile, and with strategy. After the confession, Gday turned into the man she wished he had always been. He became suddenly attentive, too attentive. He texted her every hour, cooked dinner one night, though he forgot to wash the rice, bought her flowers with long-winded apology notes, and started attending Sunday service with her again. At first glance, it looked like healing. But Metchi had learned to stop trusting appearances. She'd heard the words, "I'll never hurt you again," before. In the middle of the night, when he reached for her, she allowed it. But her soul remained untouched. What she felt for him now wasn't love. It was a hollow echo of something that had died and was too proud to decay. The real betrayal wasn't the affair. It was how deeply he had underestimated her. How he thought she would simply absorb the betrayal because of history and rings and shared bank accounts. Amara, too, tried to reclaim her place. She sent long messages filled with nostalgia and sisterhood, reposted old pictures of their childhood, and even tagged Metchi in a Women Supporting Women Instagram post. Metchi never responded. Instead, she watched, observed, and learned. She watched how Amara started withdrawing again, how Gday reverted to old patterns. Phone calls in the car, muted notifications, and sudden emergency meetings at odd hours. The only difference was now Metchi had stopped asking. Let them dance. Let them believe she was healing. What they didn't realize was that silence had become her strength. It gave her clarity. It gave her power. Every message, every lie, every attempt at cover-up was logged in her mind, like puzzle pieces slowly assembling into the perfect picture of closure. And then came the beginning of the end, a rainy Thursday. Metchi had just sealed a deal with a major client for Gday's firm. She had been working all week on it, pouring herself into presentations, strategy models, and late-night reports. After the meeting, her plan was to head home, shower, and sleep. But she forgot her phone charger at Gday's office. That detail, so small, so trivial, changed everything. She drove back to his office, not announcing herself. The receptionist was gone for lunch, the lights dim, the hallway silent. She pushed open the office door without knocking. And there they were. Amara, blouse unbuttoned, sitting on the desk. Gday, standing between her legs, trying to pull his trousers up. They both froze, faces drained. Metchi simply stood there, her purse in one hand, her eyes full of thunder. She didn't scream. She didn't curse. She turned around, walked away, and closed the door behind her. But the door to who she used to be had just slammed shut, for good. Metchi sat in her car for nearly 20 minutes before she started the engine. The rain splattered against the windshield like 1,000 reminders of what she had just witnessed. Her hands were steady on the wheel, but her mind was screaming. Amara again? She wanted to vomit, not because of heartbreak, but because of the insult. Gday hadn't even tried to hide it this time. And Amara, how could she? After all the years, the sisterhood, the secrets they shared. She hadn't expected gratitude, but she never imagined betrayal this deep. Metchi thought about how she had rushed that morning to complete Gday's proposal for a client who wouldn't even have looked at him, without her name on the strategy. She remembered the sacrifices, sleep, self-worth, Even career opportunities she turned down just to help build his brand. And this was her reward? A recycled affair with the woman who once cried on her shoulder over that same man? When she got home, she didn't cry. She walked into the house, took off her heels, and went straight to the bathroom. The water was cold, but she let it run over her body for an hour. Her tears mixed with the droplets, but they weren't tears of pain anymore. They were tears of decision. She packed a small overnight bag and went into the guest room without saying a word. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay in bed with her eyes open, staring at the ceiling, plotting. She didn't want to fight Amaras. No, this wasn't about her anymore. It was about power. It was about reclaiming her voice. Gday had taken advantage of her silence for years. Amaras had mistaken her loyalty for foolishness. Now they would both see the fire she had been withholding. The real charger she had forgotten wasn't for her phone. It was for her strength. And that strength began with a call. The next morning, she reached out to Chuka, the man Amaras had dated half-heartedly. The same man who had once told Metchi she was the kind of woman a man could build an empire with. Back then, she had shut the door on that possibility because of her loyalty to her best friend. But now, loyalty had been buried, and something bolder had risen. When Chuka heard her voice, he was stunned. When she invited him to coffee, he cleared his schedule. There was something different in Metchi's voice now, steel beneath velvet, thunder in calm waters. And as she walked into that cafe, in a fitted black dress and heels sharp enough to slice betrayal in two, she wasn't just a woman hurt. She was a woman reborn. Metchi had always believed that silence was a language too powerful for those who needed noise to feel alive. As she walked away from that office, her heart burning but her heels steady, she realized just how deep her silence could cut. She didn't scream. She didn't slam the door. She didn't ask why. She simply left them there, mid-act, both frozen in shame like statues at the altar of betrayal. The rain had not stopped, and as she stepped outside, the water soaked through her blouse and skirt, but she welcomed it. It cooled the furnace in her chest, reminded her that she was still human. She got into her car, sat still for a moment, and stared at her own reflection in the rearview mirror. She wasn't crying. That was the scariest part. Something inside her had shattered so completely that the pain had numbed. What remained now was clarity, a quiet resolve blooming where her heart used to be. That night, Metchi didn't speak to Gday. He came home late, looking disheveled and nervous. She heard the key fumble at the door. He probably expected a slap or a suitcase on the doorstep. Instead, he found her watching TV in the living room, calm as a lake. When he stammered an apology, tried to explain that what she saw was a moment of weakness, she merely stood up and walked past him to the guest room. No words, no rage. Her silence was louder than any confrontation could ever be. Gday was used to winning her back with tears and fake remorse. But this time, he was left to stew in uncertainty. He knocked on her door later that night, pleading with his voice cracking, but she didn't respond. She simply lay there on the mattress, her back to the door, her mind already sketching her way out of a marriage built on dust. By morning, Metchi had showered, dressed in navy blue pants and a crisp white blouse, and was already making calls before sunrise. She wasn't just angry, she was activated. She reviewed her company clients, outlined a contact withdrawal strategy, and checked legal documentation about her shares in Gday's firm. Then she opened her phone gallery and stared at a picture of her and Amaras at her bridal shower. They were laughing, happy, innocent. That version of her had died the moment she saw Amaras' fingers in Gday's shirt. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming her power, her name, her worth, her life. And for that, she needed to go through the same fire that had tried to consume her. But this time, she would walk through it with her head high and her hands armed with strategy. Chuka was seated in a quiet corner of the cafe, a glass of pineapple juice sweating on the table. He looked different, richer, broader, and more composed than she remembered. Time had sharpened his features, but the gentleness in his eyes hadn't changed. When he saw Metchi walk in, he stood up, unable to hide the shock on his face. It had been nearly 5 years since they had last spoken in person. She looked radiant and wounded all at once. Her beauty now carried the kind of grace that only pain could refine. "You look different," he said softly, pulling out her chair. She smiled faintly. "So do you." The small talk didn't last. She leaned in, folded her hands, and said, "I know about you and Amara. I know how she never truly valued you. I know what I gave up back then because I thought she deserved to be happy. But I also know you once told me I deserved better than the man I was planning to marry. You were right." Chuka blinked, then leaned back slowly. "Why now, Metchi?" he asked. "Why reach out after all this time?" She didn't flinch. "Because you admired me once, and I turned you down to protect a woman who stabbed me in the back. I won't protect her anymore." There was silence between them for a moment, a silence filled with curiosity, history, and buried traction. Then she said the words that sealed her intention. "I'm not asking you to fix me. I'm saying I'm ready to walk with someone who sees me. Not through pity, not through nostalgia, through now." Chuka stared at her for a long time, as if trying to separate the woman in front of him from the memory he had cherished for years. He finally nodded. "Let's take a walk," he said, and offered his hand. Metchi took it, and in that simple gesture, she knew her healing would begin in truth, not shame. As they strolled down the path outside the cafe, talking about everything from politics to childhood fears, Metchi felt something she hadn't felt in months: ease. Chuka didn't ask for details. He didn't press. He just listened. When she confessed that she was planning to leave Gday and take back her marketing clients, he looked at her and said, "Do it. And if you need help, I've got you." It wasn't a promise rooted in romance. It was respect. A respect Amara had never shown him, and Gday had long buried. That day marked the beginning of a bond forged not from flirtation, but from fire. Metchi wasn't playing a game. She had simply learned how to win it. Not by lowering her standards, but by lifting her head. And Chuka? He was ready to stand beside a woman who finally chose herself first. Metchi's transformation was silent, but stunning. No flashy announcements, no social media posts, just actions. Her wardrobe subtly shifted to powerful yet elegant pieces. Her voice in meetings became more firm, her laugh more measured. People noticed. Clients noticed. Even her in-laws noticed. And Chuka noticed. He admired the way she reclaimed her identity without the need for applause. She didn't just want to move on from Gday. She wanted to unwrite the chapters he wrote without her consent. Their dinners became more frequent, their conversations deeper. She told him about her early struggles, her sacrifices for Gday, and the moment she knew her marriage had ended. He listened like a man listening to scripture, not just to respond, but to understand. And understanding became the foundation of their attraction. Amara, meanwhile, began to panic. Rumors had started circulating about Metchi being seen with a wealthy businessman. The thought of Metchi being with Chuka, the man she had neglected for years, sent her spiraling. She called Chuka one evening, pretending to be friendly, nostalgic. But Chuka was direct. "Don't call me again, Amara," he said. "You lost the right to access me the day you betrayed the one person who would have died for you." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult her. His calm rejection stung more than a slap. Amara threw her phone across the room. She had lost everything, and for the first time in her life, she was watching someone else win without even trying to compete. Metchi wasn't just surviving, she was rising. When Chuka kissed Metchi for the first time, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't dramatic. It was under the soft glow of a garden light after a late meeting. She had turned to thank him for walking her to her car, and he had touched her cheek gently. "You don't have to prove anything to me," he whispered. "I'm just glad I finally get to see the real you." The kiss was soft, slow, and honest. It didn't erase her past. It just promised that she didn't have to walk into the future alone. That night, Metchi sat in bed and smiled for the first time in weeks. Not because of the kiss, but because for the first time she had made the choice. And it felt like power. Metchi didn't deliver the divorce papers with drama. There was no shouting, no packed suitcases or broken dishes. She had learned long ago that true power didn't come from noise. It came from precision. One Monday morning, Gday walked into the dining room expecting breakfast. What he found instead was a brown envelope on the table with his name on it. Inside were the divorce documents, neatly arranged, already signed by her. There was also a single sheet of paper with a message typed in the center. Some bridges don't burn, they are removed. At first, he laughed, thinking it was a bluff. "You're angry now," he called out. "We'll talk when you calm down." But she didn't respond. When he followed her to the guest room, she looked him dead in the eye and said, "I've never been calmer." For the first time since their marriage began, Gday felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioner. It was the cold wind of finality. As the days passed, Metchi remained composed, even as Gday spiraled. He tried everything: flowers, tears, promises. "I'll cut her off. I swear it's over," he pleaded. But she didn't budge. He had made his choice long ago, and now she was making hers. What cut him deeper than the silence was the way she carried herself. Elegant, confident, unbothered. Then came a moment that broke him. Chuka pulled up in a sleek black SUV outside their home. Metchi stepped out, hugged him, and entered the vehicle. No explanation. No hesitation. Gday stood by the window, clutching his chest like he had been stabbed. Amaras called that night, saying she felt like she was losing everything. He didn't respond. He was too busy rereading the divorce papers, realizing too late that what he thought would never leave him was already gone. The legal process moved fast. Metchi had anticipated every move, prepared every document. Her lawyer was firm but polite, offering no room for reconciliation. When Gday tried to stall by refusing to sign the final pages, she had a quiet lunch with the board members of one of his largest investor partners. She didn't speak ill of him. She simply explained that she was moving forward with her own independent business and would be redirecting her contacts. Within 2 weeks, the pressure reached him. He signed. No ceremony. No goonbis. Just a final signature that ended what they had once called love. The next day, she moved into her own furnished apartment, paid for, ironically, by her own consulting agency, built on the very relationships Gday had taken for granted. The man who had whispered another woman's name in his sleep had now lost the only name that built his future. And he didn't even see it coming. Metchi's exit from Gday's company was clinical, surgical. She gave her 2-week notice via formal email, copied the HR, the legal team, and a handful of clients who had become close over the years. No emotions, just professionalism. But beneath the surface, she was peeling herself away from years of unpaid labor, silent sacrifices, and being the brain behind a brand that only ever showcased Gday's face. Her marketing strategies had landed their top contracts. Her ideas had saved them from 2 near bankruptcies. Yet, in public, she was never more than the supportive wife. Now, she was stepping out of that shadow, and the world was about to learn where the true brilliance had always been hiding. When her resignation was announced, her phone buzzed with messages, not of sympathy, but of opportunity. Clients wanted to follow her. Some didn't even bother to wait. Her final day in the office felt like a funeral Gday didn't know he was attending. She wore a fitted black dress, heels clicking confidently on the marble floor as she walked through the corridors she helped build. Her desk was cleared, her emails auto-forwarded. When she passed by Gday's office, he opened the door and said her name with desperation. "Metchi, please." She didn't stop, didn't turn, didn't speak. It wasn't pettiness, it was purpose. She had learned that some words weren't worth giving back to people who had crushed them underfoot. By evening, her laptop was returned, her access codes revoked, and her contacts secured. In less than 24 hours, half of the firm's clientele had already switched allegiance, not because she asked them to, but because she had earned their respect. Loyalty, after all, could not be faked. For Gday, the consequences came like a thief in the night. Within weeks, project proposals were withdrawn, board members began questioning quarterly forecasts, and one of his foreign partners demanded an internal audit. He tried to explain that there had been a restructure, but the investors weren't interested in excuses. They wanted Metchi back. And when he said she had left to pursue her own thing, they simply followed her. Meanwhile, Metchi had quietly opened her boutique agency, the Reclaim Group, and was already signing her 5th client by the time Gday's accountant reported a 40% revenue drop. She didn't smile at the numbers. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about visibility, about finally being seen for what she had always been, the architect behind the empire. And now that she had stepped into her own light, there was no going back into the shadows. Chuka had never believed in love that came from pain. But watching Metchi rebuild herself with such precision, such poise, made him reconsider everything. There was no bitterness in her tone when she spoke of Gday, just reflection. No gloating when she saw her name trending on LinkedIn as the marketing queen who reclaimed her crown. Just quiet gratitude. She didn't need to tell the world who she was. Her actions did it for her. Chuka, once deeply in love with the idea of Amaras, realized that what he had admired in her was always borrowed light. Metchi was the flame. She had been all along. And now, unshackled from the weight of betrayal, that flame had become impossible to resist. One evening, after a successful pitch meeting they had attended together, he surprised her with dinner on a rooftop. No candlelight, no fancy words, just honesty. Over grilled seafood and soft music, he leaned forward and said, "I waited years for you to see me. Now I just want to make sure you never forget your worth again." Metchi looked at him, not the way she once had when she buried her feelings, but as a woman who had walked through fire and still glowed. She smiled and replied, "I'm not the same girl who was afraid of losing people." He nodded. "Good. Because I'm not afraid of loving the woman you've become." That night, they didn't talk about Amaras, or Gday, or the past. They talked about the future, joint ventures, travel plans, purpose. It wasn't a love built on rebound. It was two people who had grown into themselves, finding comfort in a space that neither expected, but both had earned. By the time they made it official, social media had already caught on. Photos leaked of them laughing at an art gallery. Tweets speculated. Amaras found out through a blog headline, "Ex-wife of Gday woke seen with ex of best friend." The bitterness in her mouth was palpable. She called Gday, hoping to plot a distraction, maybe leak false news or spread scandal, but he didn't answer. He was too busy dealing with a board that was now asking for his resignation. Meanwhile, Metchi and Chuka were already drafting partnership agreements for a new startup accelerator program. Their love didn't need fanfare. It needed only trust. And after all they had been through, that was the only thing neither of them would ever gamble again. Gday sat in the middle of his once thriving office, now silent like a graveyard. The humming energy that used to fill the building had disappeared along with Metchi. His receptionist had resigned. The legal consultant who handled all client paperwork now worked for Metchi's firm, and the remaining junior marketers were too scared to speak during strategy meetings. Everything he tried to fix seemed to fall apart faster than he could hold it. The truth he had long ignored now stared him in the face. Metchi was the foundation. Without her, his business had no soul, no direction, no loyalty. Even the clients who stayed only did so temporarily, out of pity, not confidence. His emails went unanswered, his phone stopped ringing, and the few meetings he managed to secure ended with polite rejections. Investors were pulling out. Journalists were circling like vultures. What he had built with pride, he had also destroyed with pride, and now the walls were closing in. Amaras, once the woman he sacrificed everything for, was now a weight he could no longer carry. She had no job, no income, and had quickly become more of a liability than a partner. She complained constantly about the apartment, the silence, her reputation. "Why aren't you doing something?" she'd shout, pacing the room. "You let her win." But Gday couldn't even look at her without resentment boiling in his gut. She was the reason he lost his wife, his company, his future. Every time she touched him now, it felt like fire, not the warm kind, but the destructive type that burned everything it touched. And the irony? Amaras had never really loved him. He could see it now in her eyes, the way she looked out the window longingly, her phone in hand, waiting for a message that would never come. He had broken Metchi, for a woman who couldn't even build him. That realization sat in his chest like a stone. Meanwhile, Metchi was everywhere. Her name was on panels, her face on business magazines, her voice quoted in interviews. The strategist behind the collapse of Nwok Consults, one headline read, and he winced. But what stung the most was watching her thrive, without even mentioning his name. She had not dragged him online, had not spoken to the press, had not exposed their private life. She simply moved on with grace, and that was what killed him the most. He wished she had screamed, fought him, embarrassed him. At least then, he could blame her reaction. But her silence was a mirror, and in it he saw his ruin. The same woman who once begged him to believe in her was now being believed by the world. And he was just a footnote in her success story, a faded signature on old divorce papers. The wedding invitation never reached Amaras, not because it wasn't delivered, but because it was never sent. Metchi had no interest in mockery or revenge by invitation. Her wedding to Chuka wasn't about payback, it was about freedom. It was held at a private garden estate in Lagos, attended by tech founders, brand executives, close friends, and family who had watched her crawl through the mud and now rise like royalty. The decor was simple but elegant, white roses, gold trimming, and soft lighting that made everything look like a dream. Metchi wore a custom Ankara-inspired gown that shimmered in the sun, her hair braided into a regal bun, her smile soft but victorious. Chuka stood beside her, not as a savior, but as a partner, solid, present, unshaken by her past. The guests applauded, some with tears in their eyes, as they exchanged vows beneath the soft evening sky. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't emotional, but because this time she was sure. This was hers. No betrayal lingered. No shadow followed her. Amaras, on the other hand, was seated on the edge of her mattress in her mother's flat, phone in hand, scrolling through Instagram reels she wasn't invited to. Someone had posted a video of Metchi's slow walk down the aisle, Chuka's soft kiss on her forehead, the way the crowd erupted in applause. She sat frozen, her face pale. This was supposed to be her life. She was the one who first met Gday. She had introduced Metchi to him. She had dated Chuka first. And yet, somehow, Metchi had taken both men, and yet made them hers without stealing. That was the difference. Metchi had never competed. She had only been chosen, because she had the substance Amaras always pretended to possess. For the first time in her life, Amaras had to face a truth she had always avoided. Beauty might attract attention, but character keeps it. And she had neither left. Gday watched the live stream alone in his friend's barbershop. The TV was silent, but the images spoke volumes. He watched Chuka raise his wife's hand, watched the kiss, watched the closing credits of a story he used to be the main character in. His chest tightened, his throat closed up, and for the first time in years, he wept, not out of anger, but out of loss. A loss he authored, a love he murdered, and a woman he thought would never leave. Now she was gone, married, glowing, untouchable. The barber patted his shoulder awkwardly, unaware of the full story. Guy, now then Metchi way start her own marketing agency be this? Gday nodded slowly, wiping his face. Yes, that's her. But in his heart, he knew that was no longer his Metchi. She now belonged to her purpose, and to a man who had never once needed to break her to love her. Metchi sat in her home office 2 weeks after the wedding, pen in hand, journal open, emotions tangled between memory and clarity. She had started writing a letter to Amaras, not to accuse or insult, but to pour out everything that had sat heavy in her soul. She wrote about how it felt when her best friend became the woman she feared most. She wrote about the quiet nights crying into her pillow, the shame of pretending in public while her home was on fire, and the confusion of loving a sister who didn't love her back. She wrote about the moment she saw them in that office, and how her legs nearly gave out, not from anger, but from disbelief. And then she wrote about forgiveness, not the kind that required conversation or closure, but the kind that sets you free, a kind that burns the bridge, not in hatred, but so that you never walk that way again. She looked at the pages, ink smeared from where her tears had dripped, and wondered if it was worth sending. Would Amara even read it? Would she understand? And then she realized something. Amara didn't need to read it. She didn't need to understand. This letter wasn't for her. It was for Metchi, for the woman who had once been broken, for the girl who had sacrificed her voice to protect someone else's comfort, for the bride who almost married regret. And so she folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and then slowly tore it in half. Then again, and again. She dropped the pieces into a bowl, lit a match, and watched the paper curl into ash. No bitterness, just release. It was the only funeral she needed for that friendship, a quiet burial for the version of her that once believed loyalty was owed at the cost of self-worth. That night, Chuka walked into the room to find her staring at the fire bowl. He asked if she was okay. She smiled. "I just buried something," she said softly. He kissed her hand and didn't ask further. He understood. Closure doesn't always come with an apology. Sometimes it's the silence that sets you free. As they sat together, the flames flickering low, Metchi leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, "I think I finally found peace." And he replied, "Not peace, my love, yourself." Outside, the night was quiet, but inside her heart, a new dawn had begun. One where she no longer needed to prove her worth. One where her name, spoken by the right man, would always sound like a vow, not a mistake. The days that followed Metchi's wedding were a blur for Gday. He moved like a ghost, his steps heavy, his mind stuck in rewind. The regret clung to him like sweat in a room with no air. He kept checking her old photos, zooming in on her smile, pausing on moments he never appreciated when they were real. He tried to convince himself that he wasn't mourning her, that he was just caught off guard. But late at night, when the world was asleep and his room was silent, his chest would tighten with a guilt so heavy he could barely breathe. He replayed the moment she found him with Amara in the office. He remembered the look in her eyes. It wasn't shock. It wasn't even anger. It was finality. And somehow, that was more terrifying than any outburst she could have thrown. She hadn't just walked out of that room. She had walked out of his life. Desperation crept in like a slow poison. He began drinking more, calling her old number even though it had been changed, scrolling through social media accounts that weren't hers, just to find a glimpse of her face. Then one Friday afternoon, driven by impulse and wine, he made his way to her old office building. It was foolish, he knew, but he needed to see her, needed to believe she wasn't as far gone as she seemed. Security didn't let him past the front desk. "She doesn't work here anymore," they said with indifference. "She owns her own firm now." He tried to argue, to explain, but no one listened. He sat on the curb outside the building for hours, sweating, begging God for a miracle. She never showed up. She was probably across town in some glass tower with Chuka, laughing about something brilliant or beautiful. And Gday? He was a man left behind by time, by love, by his own foolishness. His phone buzzed later that evening. It was Amara again. "Where are you?" she demanded. "You said you'd help me update my CV." He ended the call. He had nothing left to give. The truth was bitter. The woman he betrayed was now the woman everyone admired, while the woman he chose was a parasite he couldn't shake off. He stared into the distance, his heart aching with 1,000 unspoken apologies. Metchi had given him everything: love, loyalty, vision. And all he gave her in return was a name he shouldn't have whispered. Now, it was that whisper that haunted his every breath. That name, Amara, had once meant excitement. Now it tasted like ash. For Chuka, loving Metchi wasn't just about admiration. It was about rediscovery. He often watched her when she didn't notice, when she was scribbling ideas on her notepad with her tongue between her teeth, or when she paused in the middle of cooking just to sway to the music playing in the background. She carried herself like a woman who had fought wars and chosen to remain soft. One evening, after a long day at their new accelerator program launch, he pulled her aside and held her face gently. "Do you know what kind of gift you are?" he asked. "You're the kind of woman men write books about, but only one man gets to keep." She laughed softly, brushing his lips with hers. "Then write me in your story," she whispered. And he already had. She was in every future plan, every investment pitch, every business prototype. Because Metchi wasn't just a woman to be loved. She was a force to be aligned with. Their days were full of purpose. While Metchi expanded her firm and mentored young women in marketing, Chuka used his platform to uplift startups driven by women and former abuse survivors. Together, they were building not just businesses, but blueprints for healing and success. And every now and then, Metchi would remember the days when she used to cry herself to sleep. The contrast made her grateful, but never proud. She knew what it felt like to have nothing but dignity left. She carried that memory like armor. Chuka understood that, which was why he never tried to rescue her. He simply held space for her to fly. And every time she soared, he clapped the loudest, not as a man impressed, but as a man honored to be beside her. One day, while reviewing a client proposal, Chuka said something that stayed with her. "Do you know why I love you, Metchi? Because even after being broken, you didn't come back to prove a point. You came back to become the point." She smiled, tears pooling in her eyes. That was the moment she realized that this was the love she deserved all along. A love that didn't compete with her strength, but complemented it. A love that didn't fear her scars, but kissed them with reverence. And so, she leaned in, kissed Chuka deeply, and whispered back, "Thank you for waiting." Because deep down, she knew that some stories weren't stolen. They were delayed until the heart was ready. Amaras' world had crumbled. Her old friends avoided her, job offers dried up, and even casual acquaintances treated her like a pariah. Every time she introduced herself, people tilted their heads. "Oh, you're that Amara?" Her name had become synonymous with betrayal, one that echoed louder than any apology she could offer. After weeks of unanswered applications, she booked a bus to Port Harcourt, thinking a change of environment might help. But even there, her past followed like a shadow. Nobody wanted to associate with the woman who slept with her best friend's husband and still lost everything. She wasn't just jobless, she was humiliated. Her phone became her only companion, and even that held nothing but reminders of a life she destroyed with her own hands. In a moment of desperation, Amara opened her email and typed a message to Metchi. It was long, filled with teary confessions, painful memories, and pleas for forgiveness. She apologized for everything, from the affair to the silent envy she had carried for years. She admitted that she had always known Chuka loved Metchi more. She even begged for a chance to apologize in person. Her finger hovered over the send button for several minutes before she clicked it. Then she waited, anxiously checking her inbox every 10 minutes, praying for a reply. 2 days later, it came. It wasn't a long letter. It wasn't even bitter. It was a single sentence. "My silence was my answer." Amara stared at the words, heart sinking like a rock in a river. There was no insult, no anger, just truth. That reply haunted her more than any curse could. She realized in that moment that she hadn't just lost a friend. She had lost a woman whose name now commanded more honor than hers ever had. Metchi was no longer just known as the ex-wife of Gday. She was Metchi, founder, speaker, investor, woman of influence. And Amara? She was a cautionary tale. She looked into the mirror, barely recognizing the reflection. There were no more men chasing her, no more friendships to salvage, just silence. And in that silence, she saw everything she once mocked, now rising like a throne she could never touch. Metchi hadn't sought revenge. She didn't need to. Her growth had done it for her. Her name had become enough to restore, enough to lead, and most of all, enough to end the war without lifting a weapon. It began with one small invitation, a local business panel discussion focused on women in entrepreneurship. Metchi had initially declined, not wanting to become the face of someone else's scandal. But the event organizer, a young woman she once mentored, had written her a heartfelt message. "You don't owe anyone your story, Ma, but people like me find courage in your name." That line struck something inside her. So she accepted. The hall wasn't grand, but the moment was. When she stepped onto the stage, dressed in a simple cream suit with her natural hair styled in a neat bun, the audience stood. They weren't clapping for a divorcee. They weren't cheering for someone who got revenge. They were honoring a woman who had risen quietly, without dragging anyone through the mud, who had rebuilt her life without seeking pity. For the first time, Metchi realized that she didn't need to tell her side of the story. Her life was the story. The standing ovation didn't end with that event. Invitations poured in from business incubators, universities, and women's organizations. Young ladies messaged her daily, some heartbroken, some just starting out, saying her resilience made them believe in themselves again. Her name became a reference for grace under fire. Without a single blog post, without one public clapback, she had become a symbol of feminine strength. One day, while attending an investment summit in Dubai, she found herself seated between two global executives who didn't even know her full past. They respected her for her pitch, her clarity, her control. That's when it hit her. I don't need to be known by what broke me. I can be known by what I built. That was the throne. Not a platform for fame, but a platform of quiet, earned respect. Gday heard about her rise from the sidelines. He had been replaced as CEO after failing to rescue the company, and now he worked as a strategy consultant for small firms who never paid on time. Each time he saw Metchi's name trending for a partnership or keynote, he'd pour another drink. Amaras, meanwhile, had moved back in with her mother and was now running a small home makeup studio with barely any clients. Their paths had diverged completely from hers. And yet, Metchi never gloated. She had nothing to prove. Her peace didn't require their suffering. It simply required her silence. The throne she now sat on was not one built on spite, but on survival. On showing the world that women don't just recover from betrayal. They rise with crowns made from the ashes of their old selves. 1 year later, on a warm evening by the ocean in Seychelles, Metchi sat across from Chuka at a private beach dinner arranged by him to mark their first wedding anniversary. The sky was painted in gold and lavender, the air rich with the scent of salt and hibiscus. A violinist played softly in the background, but Metchi was lost in thought. She had come so far, from crying in her shower in silence to smiling at the edge of the sea, from being a background pillar in someone else's legacy to becoming the architect of her own. When Chuka reached into his pocket and handed her a small gift box, she opened it and found a gold necklace with a simple, elegant pendant. Engraved on it was one word: reclaimed. She touched it slowly, heart swelling with emotion. "That's what you've done," he said. "You didn't just survive. You reclaimed your life." Tears welled up in her eyes, but they were not from pain. They were from gratitude, from knowing that she hadn't just won a battle. She had healed a wound that could have poisoned her. She thought of all the women who had stayed silent, who had swallowed betrayal for the sake of appearances, and she felt proud not just for walking away, but for walking with grace. Her vow, she realized now, was never really to Gday. It was to herself. A vow to never abandon her worth. A vow to choose peace over pleasing. A vow to be loyal to her purpose before people. She stood up, walked over to Chuka, wrapped her arms around him and whispered, "Thank you for waiting for me to find myself before you found me." As they danced beneath the stars, barefoot in the sand, Metchi smiled, not for the cameras, not for anyone watching, but because she had truly come home to herself. Her name, once whispered in rooms of betrayal, was now spoken in boardrooms, in classrooms, in hearts of women who had been told they were too much or not enough. She had reclaimed her name, her power, her love, and most importantly, her story. And for the first time, it wasn't written by pain. It was written by her, not as a victim, not even as a survivor, but as a woman who remembered who she was and refused to forget again. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tochi Stories for more.